What you are about to hear is a work of fiction. The people, places, and events depicted in this story are products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual individuals, living or deceased, or to real situations is purely coincidental. These stories may explore themes of crime, injustice, and human suffering. While fictional, they reflect real emotions and difficult truths that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
I trusted you with everything and you destroyed my life. The words echoed through the small office as Rebecca Palmer stood trembling with rage and betrayal, staring down the man who had systematically stolen her dreams, $1 at a time. Before we go on, consider subscribing to the channel to be notified as new stories are published. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know just how far our stories reach. 3 months earlier, Rebecca Palmer had been living what she thought was a success story. At 45, she owned Sweet Beginnings, the most beloved bakery in Millbrook, a charming town of 8,000 people nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The morning sun streamed through the bakery's large front windows as Rebecca arranged fresh croissants in the display case, the aroma of cinnamon rolls and coffee creating the perfect atmosphere that had made her bakery a community gathering place. Another busy morning ahead, Rebecca murmured to herself, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. Her shoulder-length auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the early hour, her green eyes sparkled with the satisfaction that came from doing work she loved. Sweet Beginnings had been Rebecca's salvation after her messy divorce 10 years ago, when her ex-husband had left her with nothing but debt and broken promises. She'd used her grandmother's secret recipes and every penny of her settlement to create something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. The irony of the bakery's name wasn't lost on her. It truly had been her sweet beginning. The bell above the door chimed as her first customer of the day entered. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, had been coming in every Tuesday for the past 5 years. "Good morning, Rebecca dear," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "I'll take my usual blueberry muffin and a cup of your wonderful coffee." "Coming right up," Rebecca replied, her genuine smile lighting up her face. "How's your grandson doing at college?" As they chatted, Rebecca felt that familiar surge of gratitude for the life she'd built. Her customers weren't just buyers. They were friends, neighbors, part of the extended family she'd created in Millbrook. The bakery wasn't just profitable, it was her purpose. The morning rush brought a steady stream of familiar faces. Teachers grabbing coffee before school, construction workers picking up breakfast sandwiches, and stay-at-home parents treating themselves to pastries after dropping kids off. Rebecca knew everyone's name, their usual orders, and often their life stories. Around 10 o'clock, when the morning rush had settled into a gentle lull, the bell chimed again. Rebecca looked up from restocking the pastry case to see Richard Blackwood walking through the door, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expensive suit impeccable as always. "Richard," Rebecca called out cheerfully, "you're early today. Let me guess. Double espresso and a Danish?" Richard Blackwood had been handling Rebecca's finances since she'd opened Sweet Beginnings. More than that, he'd been the Palmer family's accountant for over 20 years, managing her parents' modest investments and taxes until their deaths 5 years ago. When Rebecca had nervously approached him about handling her new business's books, Richard had welcomed her with open arms, treating her like the daughter he'd never had. "Actually, Rebecca, I was hoping we could chat for a few minutes," Richard said, his tone more serious than usual. "I've been reviewing your quarterly reports, and there are some things we should discuss." Rebecca's stomach tightened slightly. Business had been good. Better than good, actually. The summer tourist season had brought record sales, and the Fall Harvest Festival had generated more orders than she could handle. But Richard always knew best when it came to finances. "Of course," she said, gesturing toward the small table in the corner where they usually met. "Can I get you anything?" Just coffee, Black, Richard replied, settling into his chair and opening his leather briefcase. Rebecca poured 2 cups of coffee and joined him, noticing the serious expression on his lined face. At 62, Richard had the distinguished look of a man who'd spent decades managing other people's money. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his brown eyes usually twinkled with warmth. Today, they seemed clouded with concern. "Rebecca," he began, spreading several documents across the table, "I'm afraid we need to talk about your cash flow situation." "Cash flow?" Rebecca repeated, confused. "But Richard, we've been busier than ever. I've been thinking about hiring another part-time baker for the morning shift." Richard shook his head slowly. "I understand it feels that way, but the numbers tell a different story. Your expenses have been climbing steadily. Ingredient costs, utilities, equipment maintenance. Plus, we've had several customers who haven't paid their catering invoices on time." Rebecca frowned, trying to recall any payment issues. "I thought the Jameson wedding paid in full last month?" "They did eventually, but it was 3 weeks late. That kind of delay affects your cash flow more than you realize," Richard explained patiently. "I'm also concerned about some equipment that needs replacing. Your main oven is showing signs of wear, and we should probably invest in a new commercial mixer before the old one breaks down completely." The familiar knot of anxiety formed in Rebecca's stomach. She'd always been grateful that Richard handled the complicated financial side of the business, but conversations like this reminded her how vulnerable she felt when it came to money management. Her ex-husband had controlled all their finances during their marriage, leaving her feeling helpless and uninformed. Richard had been patient in teaching her the basics, but she still relied heavily on his expertise. "How much are we talking about?" she asked quietly. "The oven alone will run about $15,000, and a good commercial mixer is another $8,000. But Rebecca, these aren't expenses, they're investments in your future. You can't risk equipment failure during peak season." Rebecca nodded slowly, though something nagged at her. The old oven had been running perfectly, and she'd just had the mixer serviced 6 months ago. But Richard knew about these things in ways she didn't. "I suppose we should start looking at options," she agreed reluctantly. "I've already researched some suppliers," Richard said, pulling out another set of papers. "I can handle all the negotiations and financing arrangements. You focus on what you do best, creating those incredible pastries that keep this town happy." As Richard packed up his briefcase and prepared to leave, Rebecca found herself watching him more closely than usual. His shoes were new, expensive Italian leather that probably cost more than she spent on ingredients in a month. His watch caught the light, a sleek silver piece she didn't remember seeing before. "Richard," she said suddenly, "you're doing well for yourself. New watch?" He glanced down at his wrist and smiled. "A little treat for myself. Business has been good lately. Several new clients, some investment opportunities that paid off nicely." He patted her shoulder in a fatherly way. "Don't worry about me, Rebecca. Worry about keeping this wonderful place running." After Richard left, Rebecca couldn't shake a vague feeling of unease. She tried to focus on her work, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread and experimenting with a new apple cinnamon scone recipe, but her mind kept drifting to their conversation. That evening, she was wiping down the last of the tables when her sister Amanda arrived for their weekly dinner plans. At 38, Amanda Palmer Rodriguez was 7 years younger than Rebecca but often acted like the protective older sister. She taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary and had the sharp, observant nature of someone who spent her days managing energetic 8-year-olds. "You look tired," Amanda said immediately, studying Rebecca's face with the intensity that had made her an excellent teacher. Her dark hair was shorter than Rebecca's, cut in a practical bob that framed her heart-shaped face, and her brown eyes missed nothing. "Just a long day," Rebecca replied, untying her apron. "Richard stopped by this morning with some concerns about cash flow and equipment needs." Amanda's expression shifted slightly. "Concerns? But you've been busier than ever. I can barely get a table for lunch anymore without calling ahead." That's what I thought too, but Richard says the numbers tell a different story. Apparently, we need to replace the oven and mixer, about $23,000 worth of equipment. $23,000? Amanda's voice rose. "Rebecca, that oven isn't even 5 years old, and I was here when you had the mixer serviced. The repair guy said it was in excellent condition." Rebecca sank into one of the cafe chairs, suddenly feeling exhausted. "I know it seems like a lot, but Richard knows about these things. He's been handling finances since before I even thought about opening this place." Amanda pulled out the chair across from her sister and sat down, her expression serious. "Becca, when was the last time you actually looked at your books yourself?" "You know I'm not good with numbers," Rebecca protested. "That's why I have Richard. He's been taking care of our family's finances for 20 years. Mom and Dad trusted him completely." Mom and Dad's finances were simple: Social Security, a small pension, and basic investments. Your business is different, more complex. Maybe it's time you understood more about what's happening with your money. Rebecca felt a familiar flutter of panic at the thought of trying to decipher spreadsheets and financial statements. "Amanda, I can barely keep up with inventory and staffing. The financial stuff. It's like a foreign language to me." "Then maybe it's time you learned," Amanda said gently. "Or at least got a second opinion. Rebecca, you're a smart, capable woman who built this business from nothing. You can understand your own finances." That night, Rebecca lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her small apartment above the bakery. Amanda's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of her ex-husband's dismissive attitude whenever she'd asked about their money. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it," he used to say, right up until she discovered he'd been gambling away their savings and cheating on her with his secretary. She'd sworn she'd never be that vulnerable again, yet here she was, completely dependent on someone else to manage her financial life. But Richard wasn't like her ex-husband. Richard was trustworthy, reliable, almost like a father figure. He'd never taken advantage of her parents, and he'd helped her navigate the complex world of business finances with patience and care. Still, Amanda's questions lingered. When was the last time she'd really looked at her bank statements? Richard handled all the deposits and bill payments, providing her with monthly summaries that showed profit and loss in simple terms she could understand. The summaries always showed the bakery making money, though Richard often explained that profit margins were thin and expenses were constantly rising. The next morning brought its usual rush of customers, but Rebecca found herself paying closer attention to the cash register totals and the number of items sold. By her rough calculation, they were averaging nearly $2,000 in daily sales, and that was just Tuesday, one of their slower days. Even accounting for the cost of ingredients and her part-time employees' wages, it seemed like the bakery should be more profitable than Richard's reports suggested. Around noon, while she was restocking the display case, her part-time baker Jenny Winters approached the counter looking concerned. Jenny was a recent culinary school graduate who helped with the morning baking and occasional catering events. "Rebecca," Jenny said hesitantly, "I hate to bother you, but I got a weird call from Millfield Flour Supply this morning. They said our account was past due and they needed payment before they could deliver tomorrow's order." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Past due? That's impossible. Richard handles all the supplier payments automatically." "That's what I told them, but they insisted we owed them almost $800 for last month's deliveries. I gave them Richard's number and told them to call him directly." A cold knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. Did they call him? "I assume so. They said they'd sort it out, but..." Jenny hesitated. "Rebecca, this is the third supplier who's called about late payments in the past 2 weeks. I didn't want to worry you, but maybe there's some kind of mix-up in the system?" Rebecca's hand stilled on the pastry she'd been arranging. "What other suppliers?" "Mountain View Dairy and Hartwell Produce. Both said they'd received partial payments but were still owed money. I figured Richard was handling it, but maybe you should give him a call?" The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of anxiety. Rebecca found herself jumping every time the phone rang, worried it would be another supplier demanding payment. When closing time finally arrived, she immediately called Richard's office. "Richard, Blackwood Accounting," came the smooth voice of his secretary, Patricia. "Hi, Patricia. It's Rebecca Palmer. Is Richard available?" "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but Mr. Blackwood is out of the office this week. He's attending a conference in Miami. Can I take a message?" Rebecca's anxiety spiked. "A conference? He didn't mention traveling when I saw him yesterday." "It was a last-minute opportunity," Patricia explained. "Something about new tax regulations. He'll be back Monday. Is there anything urgent I can help you with?" "I've had some suppliers calling about late payments. I was hoping Richard could clarify what's happening." There was a brief pause. "I'm sure it's just a timing issue with the electronic transfers. Mr. Blackwood is very conscientious about keeping accounts current. I'll make sure he calls you first thing Monday morning." After hanging up, Rebecca sat in her empty bakery feeling more unsettled than ever. A last-minute conference in Miami? Richard had always been methodical about his schedule, typically booking travel months in advance. And why would suppliers be calling about partial payments if the accounts were current? She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Amanda knocked on the front door. Rebecca unlocked it and let her sister inside. "You look terrible," Amanda said bluntly. "What's wrong?" Rebecca filled her in on the supplier calls and Richard's unexpected trip to Miami. Amanda listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly serious. "Becca," Amanda said finally, "I think you need to look at your bank statements. Tonight." "I wouldn't even know what to look for," Rebecca protested. "Then we'll figure it out together. Where do you keep your bank information?" Reluctantly, Rebecca led Amanda to the small office in the back of the bakery. The desk was cluttered with recipes, supplier catalogs, and employee schedules, but she found the folder where Richard had instructed her to keep copies of bank statements and financial documents. Amanda pulled out the most recent statement and spread it on the desk. "Okay, let's start simple. This shows your account balance and all the transactions for last month." Rebecca looked at the rows of numbers and felt her familiar anxiety rising. "Amanda, this is exactly why I have Richard handle this stuff. It might as well be written in ancient Greek." "It's not that complicated," Amanda said patiently. "Look, these are deposits, money coming in. These larger amounts match what you'd expect from daily sales, right?" Rebecca nodded, recognizing the amounts that roughly corresponded to her daily cash register totals. "And these are withdrawals, money going out. Most of them have check numbers or electronic transfer codes." Amanda ran her finger down the withdrawal column. "Here's your rent, utilities, payroll for Jenny." They worked through the statement line by line, and gradually Rebecca began to see patterns in the numbers. Most of the transactions made sense, regular business expenses that she recognized. But there were several large withdrawals that puzzled her. "What's this one?" Amanda pointed to a withdrawal for $3,200. "It just says business expense with an electronic transfer code." Rebecca frowned at the entry. "I have no idea. Richard handles all the electronic payments to suppliers." "And this one, $1,800 for equipment maintenance. When did you have any equipment serviced for that much money?" "I didn't," Rebecca said slowly. "The only maintenance I've had done was that mixer service I mentioned, and that was only $200. Amanda pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the bank statement. "Rebecca, we need to go through several months of these statements. Something doesn't add up." They spent the next 2 hours poring over financial documents. With each statement they examined, the picture became clearer and more troubling. There were consistent patterns of unexplained withdrawals, always described in vague terms like business consulting, equipment maintenance, or simply professional services. "Look at this," Amanda said, pointing to a series of entries from 3 months ago, 5 different withdrawals in 1 week, totaling over $8,000. "Do you remember any major expenses from that period?" Rebecca shook her head, feeling sick. "That was during the summer rush. We were incredibly busy, making more money than ever." I remember asking Richard why I couldn't afford to give Jenny a raise, and he said our profit margins were too thin. Profit margins? Amanda repeated grimly. Rebecca, based on what I'm seeing here, someone has been systematically taking money from your account. Large amounts, regularly, for months. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. You think Richard is stealing from me? I think Richard is the only person with access to your accounts who could be making these withdrawals, Amanda said carefully. And I think we need to find out exactly how much money we're talking about. Rebecca sank into her desk chair, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from under her. But Amanda, he's been like family. He took care of Mom and Dad for years. Why would he steal from me? I don't know, Amanda said gently, but we need to find out the truth, and we need to protect what's left of your money before it's too late. The next morning, Rebecca opened the bakery on autopilot, going through the familiar motions of brewing coffee and arranging pastries while her mind reeled with the implications of what she and Amanda had discovered. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she looked up, hoping it might be Richard, returned early from his conference with explanations that would make everything make sense. Instead, it was Jenny, arriving for her morning shift with a worried expression. Rebecca, I'm really sorry to bother you with this, but Hartwell Produce just called again. They're threatening to stop deliveries if we don't pay our outstanding balance by tomorrow. They say we owe them over $1,200. Rebecca's hands trembled as she tied her apron. How is that possible? We order from them twice a week, and Richard assures me all bills are paid promptly. That's what I told them, but they insisted they've only received partial payments for the past 6 weeks. They faxed over copies of our invoices showing the balance is due. Jenny handed Rebecca a stack of faxed papers. Rebecca stared at the invoices, seeing her bakery's name and account number clearly printed at the top, along with itemized lists of produce deliveries she remembered receiving. But the payment records showed only partial payments, leaving substantial balances that continued to grow week after week. This doesn't make sense, Rebecca murmured, though a sick feeling in her stomach suggested it made perfect sense if Amanda's suspicions were correct. The morning passed in a haze of familiar routines disrupted by mounting anxiety. Rebecca smiled at customers and filled orders while internally struggling with the possibility that her trusted financial advisor had been betraying her for months, maybe longer. Around 11 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's office number, and Rebecca's heart jumped. Sweet beginnings, this is Rebecca. Rebecca dear, it's Richard. Patricia told me you called yesterday about some supplier issues? His familiar, grandfatherly voice usually comforted her, but today it made her feel nauseated. Richard, thank goodness! Several suppliers are calling about unpaid balances. Hartwell Produce, Millfield Flour, Mountain View Dairy, they all say we owe them money. There was a brief pause before Richard responded, his tone reassuring. Oh, that's just a timing issue with the electronic payment system. You know how these automated systems can be. Sometimes there are delays in processing. I'll contact each of them this afternoon and get it sorted out. But Richard, they have records showing only partial payments going back weeks. How could there be timing issues for that long? Another pause, slightly longer this time. Rebecca, you know how complicated business accounting can be. These suppliers sometimes have inefficient systems that don't properly credit payments. I'll straighten everything out. You have my word. Rebecca found herself gripping the phone tighter. Richard, I've been looking at my bank statements, and there are several large withdrawals I don't understand. Could you explain what they're for? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had a slight edge she'd never heard before. Rebecca, I'm disappointed that you felt the need to go through financial records without consulting me first. You know how easily numbers can be misinterpreted by someone without accounting experience. Those withdrawals are for various business expenses, consulting fees, equipment maintenance, professional services. Everything is properly documented in your business files. Could we go over those documents together? Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I'd like to understand them better. Of course, dear. When I get back from Miami next week, we'll sit down and review everything in detail. In the meantime, please don't worry yourself about these supplier issues. I'll handle everything. After Richard hung up, Rebecca sat staring at the phone. His explanations sounded reasonable, the way they always did, but something felt different this time. There had been an undertone of irritation when she'd mentioned looking at the bank statements, and his promise to handle everything felt less comforting than it used to. That evening, Amanda arrived at the bakery with a laptop bag and a determined expression. I've been doing some research, she announced, setting up her computer on one of the cafe tables. I want to show you something. Amanda opened a spreadsheet she'd created with columns for dates, withdrawal amounts, and descriptions. I've entered all the unexplained withdrawals from your bank statements over the past 6 months. Look at this pattern. Rebecca studied the screen, seeing her sister's neat organization of what had been confusing financial data. The pattern was clear and devastating. Withdrawals ranging from $1,500 to $4,000, occurring every 2 to 3 weeks, always described in vague terms that provided no real information about their purpose. The total is $37,000, the CC's 2F dividend, Amanda said quietly. Rebecca, in 6 months, $37,000 has been taken from your business account for expenses that you can't identify or remember authorizing. Rebecca felt the room spinning slightly. $37,000, more than she'd make in profit for an entire year, even in a good year. But that's impossible. If that much money was missing, I'd know. The business would be failing. Would you? Amanda asked gently. You don't look at the statements, you don't handle the day-to-day financial management. Richard provides you with summary reports that show what he wants you to see. For all you know, your business should be doing much better than those reports indicate. The implications hit Rebecca like a tsunami. If Amanda was right, then Richard hadn't just been stealing money. He'd been manipulating her perception of her business's performance to hide the theft. The cash flow problems he'd been warning her about weren't the result of market conditions or late payments from customers. They were the result of him systematically draining her accounts. We need proof, Rebecca said, her voice stronger than she felt. Before we accuse Richard of anything, we need concrete evidence. Amanda nodded. I've been thinking about that too. What if we contacted some of your suppliers directly? If Richard has been making partial payments to cover his tracks, they'll have records showing exactly what was paid and when. Over the next 2 days, Rebecca and Amanda methodically contacted every major supplier the bakery used. The picture that emerged was consistently damaging. All of them reported receiving irregular, partial payments that left substantial balances unpaid. Most had been hesitant to press for payment because Rebecca had been a reliable customer for years, but their patience was wearing thin. Millfield Flour Supply provided the most detailed records, showing a pattern of payments that corresponded exactly with some of the mysterious withdrawals on Rebecca's bank statements. But where the bank statement showed a withdrawal of $3,200 for business expense, Millfield had only received $800, leaving a balance of $2,400 unpaid. The other $2,400 had simply vanished. It's fraud, Amanda said bluntly as they reviewed the supplier records. Richard has been writing checks or making electronic transfers for the full amount he owes suppliers, then pocketing the difference. The suppliers get partial payment, you think full payment has been made, and Richard steals thousands of dollars. Rebecca stared at the evidence spread across her desk, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How could he do this to me? I trusted him completely. He was at my parents' funerals, Amanda. He helped me figure out their estate. He's been like family. That's probably why he thought he could get away with it, Amanda said sadly. He knew you trusted him completely and would never question his judgment about financial matters. The next morning brought a crisis that forced Rebecca's hand. Her business checking account was overdrawn by nearly $800, and the bank called to inform her that several checks had bounced, including her rent payment and Jenny's paycheck. The overdraft fees alone would cost her $200. Rebecca called Richard's office in a panic, but Patricia informed her that he was still in Miami and wouldn't be back until the following week. "It's an extended conference," Patricia explained. "Mr. Blackwood is taking some well-deserved vacation time afterward." Well-deserved vacation time funded by stolen money, Rebecca thought bitterly. That afternoon, with Amanda's support, Rebecca took a step she'd never imagined necessary. She went to the police. Detective Michael Torres was a serious man in his early 40s who listened patiently as Rebecca and Amanda presented their evidence. He examined the bank statements, supplier records, and the spreadsheet Amanda had created showing the pattern of unexplained withdrawals. "This appears to be a clear case of embezzlement," Detective Torres said finally, "but building a criminal case will require more evidence than what you've shown me. We'll need to document the full extent of the theft and prove that Mr. Blackwood was the one making these unauthorized withdrawals." "How do we do that?" Rebecca asked. "We'll need to work with your bank to get complete transaction records, including check images and electronic transfer authorizations. We'll also need to examine Mr. Blackwood's personal financial records to trace where your money went. That will require a warrant, which means we need enough evidence to convince a judge that a crime has been committed." Detective Torres explained the process of building a fraud case, emphasizing that it would take time and that Rebecca should prepare for the possibility that some of her money might never be recovered. He also advised her to immediately remove Richard's access to her accounts and find a new accountant to help sort out her business finances. "In the meantime," he said, "don't let Mr. Blackwood know that you're investigating him. If he realizes you're onto his scheme, he might try to cover his tracks or disappear with whatever money he can access." Rebecca left the police station feeling overwhelmed but strangely empowered. For the first time in months, she was taking control of her financial situation instead of passively accepting someone else's management of her money. The next step was finding a new accountant, which proved easier than expected. Amanda had done research and found Patricia Hernandez, a certified public accountant who specialized in small business finances and had experience with fraud cases. Patricia Hernandez was a woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She examined Rebecca's financial records with the same systematic approach Amanda had used, but with the trained eye of a professional. "This is textbook embezzlement," Patricia said after reviewing the evidence. "The pattern is consistent with someone who has unlimited access to your accounts and knows you're not monitoring the transactions closely. The good news is that the paper trail is clear. Every fraudulent transaction is documented. The bad news is that you've lost a substantial amount of money." Patricia's preliminary analysis suggested that the theft had been going on for nearly 3 years, with the amounts increasing over time as Richard became more confident in his ability to avoid detection. The total stolen was likely over $100,000, though a complete forensic accounting would be needed to determine the exact figure. "The important thing now is to secure your remaining assets and begin the process of recovering what was stolen," Patricia explained. "We'll work with the police and your bank to freeze any accounts Richard has access to and trace the stolen funds." Rebecca authorized Patricia to take over all her financial management immediately. They went to the bank together, where Rebecca closed her existing accounts and opened new ones that Richard couldn't access. She also provided the bank with a letter from Detective Torres requesting complete transaction records for the fraud investigation. Over the weekend, Rebecca found herself cycling through anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of relief. The anger was obvious. Richard had stolen from her for years, taking advantage of her trust and her insecurity about financial matters. The betrayal cut even deeper because she genuinely cared about Richard, considering him family and trusting him with her dreams. But the relief was unexpected and powerful. For months, she'd been struggling with a nagging sense that something was wrong with her business's finances, even though she couldn't identify what it was. Richard's explanations had always made sense on the surface, but they'd never quite eliminated her underlying anxiety about money. Now she knew why. Her instincts had been correct. There had been something wrong, something very wrong indeed. Amanda spent most of Saturday at the bakery, helping Rebecca update her supplier accounts and arrange payment plans for the outstanding balances. Most of the suppliers were understanding once they learned what had happened, agreeing to accept partial payments while Rebecca worked to recover the stolen funds. "You know what this means, don't you?" Amanda said as they organized paperwork in the back office. "Your business is actually much more successful than Richard led you to believe. If he's been stealing thousands of dollars a month and you've still been able to keep the doors open, imagine how well you'll do once you keep all the money you earn." Rebecca looked around her bakery, the gleaming equipment that didn't need replacing, the steady stream of loyal customers, the reputation she'd built through years of hard work and quality products. Amanda was right. Sweet Beginnings wasn't struggling because of thin profit margins or market conditions. It was struggling because someone she trusted had been systematically stealing her success. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Rebecca was preparing for the morning rush when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's office number. "Sweet Beginnings, this is Rebecca." "Rebecca, dear, it's Richard. I'm back from Miami and wanted to touch base about those supplier issues you mentioned. I spoke with several of them last week and sorted everything out." Rebecca's heart pounded, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "That's wonderful, Richard. I was worried about those outstanding balances." "No need to worry at all. Everything is current now. In fact, I was thinking we should meet this afternoon to go over some new investment opportunities I learned about at the conference. There are some excellent ways to improve your cash flow that I'd like to discuss." The audacity took Rebecca's breath away. Even now, after stealing over $100,000 from her business, Richard was planning to continue the charade, probably looking for new ways to take her money. "That sounds interesting," Rebecca managed to say. "What time works for you?" "How about 3 o'clock? We can meet at my office. I have some materials I want to show you." After hanging up, Rebecca immediately called Detective Torres and Patricia Hernandez. They quickly arranged to meet at the police station to plan how to handle the afternoon meeting with Richard. "This is perfect timing," Detective Torres explained. "We've been waiting for an opportunity to catch him in the act or get him to make incriminating statements. If you're willing to wear a wire, we can record your conversation with him." Rebecca's stomach churned at the thought, but she nodded. "What do I need to do?" "Act naturally," Patricia advised. "Ask questions about your finances, but don't be too aggressive or suspicious. Let him explain the investment opportunities he mentioned. The more he talks about managing your money, the stronger our case becomes." 2 hours later, Rebecca sat in Richard's familiar office, a tiny recording device hidden beneath her blouse. The office looked exactly as it always had. Mahogany furniture, diplomas and certifications on the walls, family photos on the desk. But now everything felt different, tainted by the knowledge of what Richard had been doing. "Rebecca, you look wonderful," Richard said warmly, gesturing for her to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. "I hope you weren't too worried about those supplier issues. As I said, everything is resolved now." "I'm so grateful you took care of it," Rebecca replied, proud that her voice sounded steady. "I have to admit, I was starting to panic when they kept calling." Richard waved dismissively. "That's exactly why you have me handling these matters. Business finances can be complicated, and suppliers sometimes make mistakes in their bookkeeping. You shouldn't have to worry about such things." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several glossy brochures. "Now, let me tell you about these investment opportunities. There are some excellent tax shelter strategies that could significantly improve your cash flow situation." For the next 20 minutes, Richard outlined elaborate investment schemes that would require Rebecca to transfer large sums of money to accounts he would manage on her behalf. The investments promised unrealistic returns and seemed designed primarily to give Richard access to more of her money. "It sounds complicated," Rebecca said carefully. How much money would we be talking about? Well, to see significant returns, we'd want to start with at least $50,000, Richard said smoothly. I know that seems like a lot, but based on your business's performance, you should be able to access that amount through a business loan or line of credit. Rebecca stared at him in amazement. Even after stealing over $100,000 from her, he was trying to convince her to borrow money so he could steal even more. Richard, she said slowly, I've been looking more closely at my bank statements lately, and there are some withdrawals I don't understand. Could you help me identify what they're for? For the first time, Richard's confident demeanor flickered slightly. Rebecca, as I mentioned before, those are routine business expenses. I have all the documentation in your files. Could we look at those files now? I'd really like to understand where my money is going. Richard's smile became strained. Of course, dear, but it's quite late in the day. Why don't we schedule another meeting this week when we'll have more time to go through everything in detail? Actually, I have time now, Rebecca pressed. I'm really concerned about some of these larger withdrawals. This one for $3,200. What was that for? Richard stood up abruptly, his face flushing. Rebecca, I'm beginning to feel like you don't trust my judgment. After 20 years of managing your family's finances successfully, I find it hurtful that you're questioning every transaction. I'm not questioning your judgment, Rebecca said, though that was exactly what she was doing. I just want to understand my own business better. Understanding your business means focusing on what you do best, baking and customer service. Richard snapped, his grandfatherly mask slipping completely. Leave the financial management to professionals who actually understand it. The condescending tone was so reminiscent of her ex-husband that Rebecca felt a surge of anger override her fear. Richard, I may not be a financial expert, but I'm not stupid. I know when something doesn't add up, and my business finances haven't been adding up for months. Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Rebecca could see him calculating his options. Finally, he sat back down and forced his familiar smile back into place. You're absolutely right to want to understand your finances better, he said, his tone returning to its usual warmth. I apologize if I seem dismissive. It's just that I care about you like family, and I hate to see you worrying unnecessarily about things I can handle for you. But Rebecca had heard the mask slip, and she couldn't unsee what was underneath. This man had been stealing from her for years, and now he was trying to manipulate her into giving him access to even more money. I think I need some time to consider these investment options, she said, standing up to leave, and I'd like to review those expense documents you mentioned. Of course, Richard agreed quickly. I'll pull everything together for our next meeting. Rebecca left Richard's office feeling shaky but triumphant. She'd gotten through the meeting without revealing what she knew, and hopefully the recording would provide evidence of his attempts to continue manipulating her finances. The next morning, Detective Torres called with news that made Rebecca's heart race. We obtained a warrant to examine Richard Blackwood's personal bank accounts, he said. You're not going to believe what we found. The detective explained that Richard had been depositing the stolen money into a personal account, then using it to fund an extravagant lifestyle that included expensive vacations, luxury car payments, and high-end purchases. The conference in Miami had actually been a week-long stay at a 5-star resort paid for with Rebecca's money. We also found evidence that you're not his only victim. Detective Torres continued. He's been embezzling from at least 3 other small business clients, using the same methods he used on you. The total theft is over $400,000. Rebecca sat down heavily in her desk chair. $400,000 stolen from small business owners who had trusted Richard with their financial lives. How many other people had he betrayed the way he'd betrayed her? What happens now? She asked. We're issuing a warrant for his arrest this afternoon. We'll also be freezing his assets to begin the process of recovering the stolen funds. It won't be quick, and you probably won't recover everything, but we should be able to get back a significant portion of what he took. That afternoon, Rebecca was arranging cupcakes in the display case when Amanda burst through the bakery door, her face flushed with excitement. "They arrested him," Amanda announced. "I just saw it on the local news. Richard Blackwood arrested for embezzlement and fraud." Rebecca's hands trembled as she set down the tray of cupcakes. After months of anxiety and weeks of investigation, it was finally over. Richard would face justice for what he'd done, and she could begin rebuilding her business and her life. The news of Richard's arrest spread quickly through Millbrook. By evening, Rebecca's phone was ringing constantly with calls from customers, suppliers, and friends offering support. Many people shared that they'd had their own suspicions about Richard's expensive lifestyle, but no one had imagined he was stealing from his clients. Mrs. Henderson, Rebecca's loyal Tuesday morning customer, stopped by with a plate of homemade cookies and a card signed by dozens of community members. "We all believe in you, dear," the elderly woman said warmly. "This bakery is the heart of our community, and we're going to make sure it survives this terrible betrayal." Over the next several weeks, Rebecca discovered just how much her community valued Sweet Beginnings. Local businesses organized a fundraising event to help her cover the outstanding supplier debts. The town newspaper ran a feature story about her situation, leading to an outpouring of support from neighboring communities. Orders poured in from people who wanted to help her rebuild. Patricia Hernandez worked tirelessly to untangle the financial mess Richard had created. The forensic accounting revealed that Richard had stolen $127,000 from Rebecca's business over 3 years, but his arrest had frozen assets worth nearly $200,000. Between asset recovery and insurance claims, Rebecca would eventually recover most of what had been stolen. More importantly, Patricia's analysis of Rebecca's actual business performance painted a picture of remarkable success. Without Richard's theft, Sweet Beginnings had been consistently profitable, with growth rates that exceeded most small businesses in the area. "You should be proud of what you've built," Patricia told Rebecca during one of their weekly meetings. "Even while being systematically robbed, you managed to create a thriving business that serves your community and supports your employees. That takes real skill and determination." 3 months after Richard's arrest, Rebecca stood in her bakery early one morning, preparing for what she knew would be a busy day. The financial crisis was behind her, the outstanding debts were paid, and for the first time in years, she truly understood her business's finances. Jenny had been promoted to assistant manager and was training 2 new part-time bakers to help handle the increased business. The equipment Richard had claimed needed replacing was running perfectly, and Rebecca had been able to give everyone raises from the money that wasn't being stolen anymore. The bell above the door chimed, and Amanda walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the new shop down the street. "How does it feel?" Amanda asked, settling into their usual table in the corner. "Different," Rebecca admitted. "Scary sometimes, but good scary. Like when you realize you're stronger than you thought you were." "You were always strong," Amanda said firmly. "Richard just convinced you that you weren't. That's what predators do. They make their victims feel helpless so they won't fight back." Rebecca nodded, thinking about the lessons she'd learned from her ordeal. She discovered that her instincts about money were actually quite good when she trusted them. She'd learned that understanding basic business finances wasn't as complicated as she'd been led to believe. Most importantly, she'd learned that asking questions and demanding answers wasn't disrespectful, it was necessary. "I keep thinking about all the red flags I ignored," Rebecca said. "His expensive clothes, the luxury car, the sudden trips. If I'd been paying attention." "You trusted someone you thought was trustworthy," Amanda interrupted. "That's not a character flaw, Becca. That's what normal people do with people they care about." 6 months later, Rebecca received a call from Detective Torres with the final news about Richard's case. "He pled guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud," the detective reported. "He'll serve 4 years in prison and pay full restitution to all his victims. Between his assets and insurance, you should recover about 90% of what he stole from you." Rebecca hung up the phone and looked around her bustling bakery. The lunch rush was in full swing, with every table occupied and a line of customers waiting to order. Jenny was efficiently managing the register, while the new bakers restocked the display cases with fresh pastries. Through the window, she could see the "Help Wanted" sign she'd posted for another part-time position. Business was so good that they needed additional staff, something that would have been impossible when Richard was draining money from her accounts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Dinner tonight to celebrate? I'm buying." Rebecca smiled as she typed back, "Absolutely. I have so much to be grateful for." That evening, as Rebecca and Amanda raised their glasses in a toast to justice and new beginnings, Rebecca reflected on how much her life had changed. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. She'd learned to trust herself, to ask questions, and to take control of her own financial destiny. Richard Blackwood had tried to steal more than her money. He'd tried to steal her confidence, her independence, and her dreams. But he'd failed. Rebecca Palmer was stronger than ever. Her business was thriving, and she'd built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Sweet Beginnings had lived up to its name once again, proving that it's never too late for a fresh start, especially when you have the courage to fight for what's rightfully yours and the wisdom to trust in your own strength. The bakery's success continued to grow, fueled not just by Rebecca's incredible pastries, but by the community's admiration for her resilience. She'd turned her greatest challenge into her greatest triumph, showing everyone, including herself, that trust isn't about being naive, but about being strong enough to build genuine relationships while smart enough to protect yourself from those who would take advantage. As Rebecca locked up the bakery that night, she paused to look at the framed photo on her desk, a picture from the community fundraiser that had helped her through the crisis. Dozens of smiling faces surrounded her, representing the real family she'd built in Millbrook. Richard had been wrong about many things, but he'd been especially wrong about this. Rebecca Palmer wasn't someone who needed to be protected from the complexities of business and finance. She was someone who could master those complexities while never losing the warmth and generosity that made her bakery a place where everyone felt welcome. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but Rebecca faced them with confidence, knowing that she had everything she needed to succeed: her own skills, her sister's support, her community's loyalty, and most importantly, the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger on the other side. Thank you for watching our story today. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but as Rebecca learned, we're stronger than we know, and we're never truly alone when we have the courage to ask for help. Thank you for listening until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving us a like. This helps us reach more people.